East slope of the Absarokas, October 1867. 8,000 feet above sea level, where frost pops in the morning grass and winter comes early. A lone mountain trapper fills willow frame baskets with dry lodgepole cones, each 2 to 3 inches long, then stacks them in a specially built pole shed with slatted floors and deep eaves. 3 bays, each holding about a bushel and a quarter per layer, 5 layers deep. Enough cones to last a 120-day heating season. Other mountain men ride past and laugh, "Squirrel pickin'. Try a man's axe." They insist the normal way, splitting an armful of pencil-thick kindling every morning, is all any real trapper needs. The cone cache trapper just points to his scars from the previous winter when wet snow glazed his kindling pile. Solid, forcing him to work barehanded in sub-zero wind for an hour just to get a flame. Then December arrived. Temperatures plunged to 20 below, then 38 below zero. The standard method collapsed. Mountain men burned daylight, splitting frozen sticks with numb fingers, hunting for dry splinters under snow crust, fighting damp splits that smoldered and died. Meanwhile, the squirrel picker laid 2 cones on a twig grate, struck 1 match, and had sustained flame under wrist-thick fuel in less than 2 minutes. What did he understand about resin chemistry and natural draft that turned mockery into desperate imitation by February? The morning air bit sharp at 8,000 feet as the trapper worked methodically through the lodgepole stand, frost crunching under his boots with each step. October in the Absarokas meant hurried preparation. Winter could arrive without warning, and a man caught unprepared would pay with more than comfort. He carried a willow-framed pack basket, its woven construction allowing air to circulate around whatever he gathered, and moved from tree to tree with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to read the forest's offerings. The cones he sought hung in clusters from the lodgepole branches, some sealed tight with resin, others already opened and emptied by wind and wildlife. He passed over the green, unopened specimens and focused on those that had weathered at least 1 full season, dry, brittle to the touch. Their scales spread wide like tiny wooden roses. Each cone measured between 2 and 3 inches in length, light enough that a full basket felt manageable even after hours of gathering, yet substantial enough to burn with authority when the time came. Back at his camp, the trapper had spent the better part of September constructing what would become the foundation of his winter fire system. The pole shed stood under a cluster of mature firs, positioned to catch morning sun, but sheltered from the prevailing northwest winds that would soon carry snow and sleet across the high country. The structure measured 12 feet long by 8 feet wide, with a roof pitched at 8 inches of rise for every 12 inches of run, steep enough to shed snow quickly, but not so steep as to waste precious lumber. The floor consisted of lodgepole rails split in half and laid with quarter-inch gaps between them, allowing air to move freely underneath while keeping the stored cones off the damp ground. Above, the roof extended a full 12 inches beyond the walls on all sides, creating deep eaves that would protect the contents from driving rain and snow. 3 separate bays divided the interior space, each designed to hold approximately 1¼ cubic feet per layer, with 5 layers planned for each bay. The mathematics were simple but crucial. 18 to 20 cubic feet of total storage, equivalent to 14 to 16 bushels of cones. As he worked to fill the first bay, the trapper calculated his needs with the precision of a man who had learned to count everything that mattered for survival. A typical heating season in this country ran 120 days, from early November through late February. He planned to build 2 fires daily, one in the morning to break the night's chill and cook breakfast, another in the evening for warmth and supper. Each fire would consume 3 to 4 cones in the initial lighting phase, meaning he needed between 720 and 960 cones for the season. He gathered nearly double that amount, knowing that abundance in autumn meant security when the real cold arrived. The cone drying process required as much attention as the gathering itself. Fresh cones, even those that appeared dry, still held moisture in their woody scales and could molder if stored immediately. The trapper spread each day's harvest on woven willow mats in a sunny clearing near his camp, turning them twice daily for 48 to 72 hours depending on humidity and air movement. Properly dried cones felt almost weightless and produced a faint rattle when shaken, the sound of loose seeds moving within the opened scales. During the drying period, he sorted through each batch with careful attention to quality. Cones that showed any sign of insect damage or rot went into the fire immediately. There was no point in storing inferior material that might compromise the entire cache. Those that had collected debris or excessive dirt got a thorough shaking to remove foreign matter that could interfere with clean burning. The finest specimens, fully opened and uniformly dried, earned their place in the storage bays where they would wait for winter's test. 2 canvas sacks, each measuring 24 inches by 36 inches, hung from wooden pegs inside his cabin. These served as the daily issue containers, holding enough cones for 3 to 4 days of fire, starting without requiring trips to the main cache in severe weather. He calculated that each sack could hold approximately 60 cones when loosely packed, providing a reasonable buffer against extended storms that might keep him confined to quarters. The system represented more than simple preparation. It embodied a fundamental shift in thinking about fire management. Most mountain men treated fire starting as a daily chore, something to be handled with whatever materials lay immediately at hand. They split kindling each morning, often working with cold steel and numb fingers to reduce thumb-thick branches into pencil-thin splinters. The process consumed time and energy when both were most precious, and it depended entirely on finding and processing dry wood, regardless of weather conditions. The cone cache eliminated those variables. Each cone functioned as a self-contained fire starter, its resin-rich scales acting as both tinder and kindling in a single package. The overlapping scales created natural air channels that promoted good draft, while the concentrated resins provided intense heat that could ignite even slightly damp fuel. Most importantly, the entire supply sat ready for use regardless of conditions outside. No splitting, no searching, no gambling on the moisture content of whatever wood happened to be available. The trapper understood that his neighbors viewed the cone gathering with amusement, if not outright contempt. To men who prided themselves on their ability to start fires under any conditions, the careful stockpiling of what they considered squirrel food seemed like admitting defeat before the battle began. They trusted their axes, their splitting techniques, and their experience with conventional kindling materials. The idea that a grown man would spend precious autumn days gathering pine cones struck them as evidence of either excessive caution or fundamental incompetence with proper firecraft. December arrived with the weight of iron. A massive high-pressure ridge settled over the northern plains and began draining Arctic air into every valley and basin across the mountain west. The barometric pressure climbed steadily for 3 days, creating the atmospheric conditions that old-timers recognized as the harbinger of serious cold. When the wind finally died to absolute stillness, temperatures began their relentless descent. At the army posts scattered across the territory, duty officers recorded readings that would become legendary in their severity. Fort Laramie's thermometer bottomed out at 28 below zero on the morning of December 15th. 3 days later, a cavalry patrol returning from the Powder River country reported seeing mercury freeze solid in their instruments, a phenomenon that occurred at 38 degrees below zero. The cold was not merely uncomfortable, it represented a fundamental challenge to every aspect of frontier survival. In the high camps scattered throughout the Absarokas, the temperature differential between day and night compressed into a narrow band of misery. Noon might bring the thermometer to 5 degrees above zero, while the following dawn could see it plunge to 25 below. The mathematics of heat loss became brutally simple. Every BTU generated had to overcome an enormous temperature gradient just to maintain basic habitability. For most mountain men, the morning fire routine had evolved into a predictable sequence of minor torments. The process began while still wrapped in robes and blankets, as stepping onto a cabin floor in bare feet could cause frostbite within minutes. First came the careful emergence from bedding, followed by the fumbling search for boots that had frozen stiff during the night. Then the real work began. Outside, the woodpile presented its own challenges. Logs that had seemed adequately seasoned in autumn now rang like iron when struck with an axe. The standard technique required splitting larger rounds down to pencil thickness, creating the fine kindling necessary to coax flame from reluctant tinder. In normal weather, this process consumed 15 to 20 minutes of steady work. In the grip of 30 below cold, it stretched into an endurance test that could easily consume an hour. The splitting itself became an exercise in precision under duress. Each swing of the hatchet had to account for wood that had contracted and hardened beyond normal parameters. Steel that bit cleanly through summer-dried pine now bounced and skittered off surfaces that seemed to have acquired the properties of seasoned oak. Worse, the repeated impacts transmitted shock waves through tool handles into hands that grew progressively more numb with each passing minute. Even when the splitting succeeded, the resulting kindling presented new problems. Pencil-thin sticks that would normally catch fire readily now seemed designed to resist ignition. The extreme cold had driven every trace of surface moisture deep into the wood fibers, but it had also made the material so dense that flame struggled to establish itself. What should have been a quick transition from tinder to kindling to fuel became a delicate negotiation requiring constant attention and frequent failure. The cone cache trapper faced the same brutal temperatures, but his morning routine unfolded with mechanical efficiency. Rising in darkness, he pulled on boots that he had worn by placing them against his body during the night, a small preparation that saved precious minutes and prevented frostbite. From the canvas sack hanging by his door, he selected 4 cones, each one dry and ready after months of proper storage. The fire lay required no improvisation. He arranged a foundation of thumb-thick sticks in a loose grid pattern, creating air spaces that would allow oxygen to reach the flame from multiple directions. On this foundation, he placed 2 cones, positioning them so their open scales faced upward to catch the initial flame. 2 additional cones went into reserve positions, ready to extend the burn time if the primary fuel proved reluctant to catch. The lighting sequence eliminated every variable that plagued conventional fire starting. A single match applied to the base of the first cone produced immediate results. The resin-soaked scales caught flame within seconds, creating a broad, hot fire front that spread quickly through the cone's natural architecture. The overlapping scales acted as miniature chimneys, drawing air through the structure and concentrating heat exactly where it was needed most. Within 90 seconds, the cone fire had generated enough heat and flame to ignite the thumb-thick foundation sticks. The transition from starter to sustainable fire occurred smoothly, without the anxious moments of watching tinder die or kindling smolder without catching. By the 2-minute mark, he was adding wrist-thick fuel to a fire that burned with steady authority. The chemistry behind the success lay in the concentrated resins that lodgepole pines use to seal their cones. These compounds, primarily monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes, possessed flash points well below the temperature of a burning match. When heated, they volatilized rapidly, creating flammable vapors that ignited explosively and burned with intense heat. The cone structure maximized this effect by providing optimal air-to-fuel ratios and ensuring that heat concentrated in the most effective locations. Meanwhile, in camps throughout the basin, men struggled with the traditional approach. The camp boss on Willow Fork spent 45 minutes on the morning of December 18th trying to coax flame from kindling that seemed determined to resist ignition. His crew watched from their bedrolls as he worked with increasingly desperate intensity, splitting ever finer shavings and cursing the stubborn wood that refused to cooperate. When his kindling finally caught, it burned with a weak, guttering flame that required constant feeding and attention. The transition to larger fuel took another 15 minutes of careful nursing, during which the fire died twice and had to be restarted from scratch. By the time he had a sustainable flame, his hands were numb to the wrists, and his temper had reached the breaking point. The freighter camped along the Bozeman Road faced even worse conditions. His schedule demanded an early start regardless of weather, but the morning fire routine now consumed so much time that he was reaching his destinations hours behind schedule. His mules stood shivering in their traces while he fought with frozen kindling and matches that seemed to burn out before they could ignite anything useful. January 1868 brought no mercy. The high-pressure system that had settled over the region showed no signs of weakening, and daily temperature readings at scattered outposts painted a picture of unprecedented severity. Fort Bridger recorded daytime highs that never exceeded 0 degrees, while nighttime lows consistently dropped below 25 degrees below zero. At higher elevations where the mountain camps struggled to survive, conditions grew even more extreme. The cone cache trapper refined his system through daily practice, developing operational details that transformed winter fire management from desperate improvisation into reliable routine. His selection process became increasingly sophisticated as he learned to read the subtle differences between cones that had weathered different conditions. Those that had hung on south-facing branches showed superior burning characteristics, their resin content concentrated by cycles of freezing and thawing that drove moisture out while preserving the volatile compounds that made for explosive ignition. The drying process he had established in autumn now proved its worth. Cones that rattled with the sound of loose seeds burned cleanly and completely, while those that remained silent often harbored moisture that caused them to hiss and sputter when exposed to flame. He developed a simple test, shaking each cone near his ear before adding it to the ready basket, that eliminated unreliable materials before they could compromise a critical fire start. His storage methodology evolved beyond simple protection from weather. The 3-day ready basket inside his cabin maintained cones at ambient temperature, preventing the thermal shock that occurred when materials moved directly from below zero outdoor storage to the heat of flame. He discovered that cones stored at consistent temperatures ignited more readily and burned more predictably than those subject to extreme temperature swings. The fire lay itself became a precisely choreographed sequence. He began with a foundation of dry twigs no thicker than a pencil, arranged in a loose grid that maximized air circulation while providing stable support for the burning cones. The twig selection process required careful attention to species and condition. Mountain mahogany and serviceberry twigs burned hot and fast, while willow provided longer-lasting coals that bridged the gap to heavier fuel. On this foundation, he positioned 2 cones with their opened ends facing the prevailing air current within his cabin. This orientation ensured that the initial flame would draw oxygen through the cone's natural channels, intensifying the burn and extending the effective burning time. A 3rd cone went into position as immediate backup, while the 4th remained in reserve for challenging conditions when even the proven system might require additional support. The lighting sequence eliminated every moment of uncertainty that plagued traditional methods. His matches lived in a tin box tucked against his body overnight, ensuring they remained dry and at workable temperature. The first match went to the base of the primary cone, where the concentrated resin provided maximum surface area for initial ignition. Within 15 seconds, flames spread through the cone's architecture, creating a broad fire front that generated both intense heat and sustained burn time. The transition to sustainable fuel occurred with mechanical precision. As the cone fire reached its peak intensity, usually between 90 and 120 seconds after ignition, he added thumb-thick sticks of lodgepole pine, positioning them to catch the rising flame while maintaining air circulation around the burning structure. These intermediate-sized pieces caught flame readily in the cone's intense heat, providing the thermal mass necessary to ignite wrist-thick fuel that would sustain the fire through cooking and heating tasks. His wind discipline proved crucial during the most severe weather. Even inside his cabin, air currents could disrupt the delicate process of transitioning from cone to sustainable fuel. He positioned a half-log windbreak on the upwind side of his fire lay, creating a pocket of still air that allowed flames to develop without interference. This simple modification increased his success rate from reliable to virtually foolproof. The Norwegian sawyer's influence showed in details that separated adequate preparation from professional execution. The cone storage bins incorporated features borrowed from lumber camp experience: slanted floors that shed condensation, removable dividers that allowed for quality sorting, and hinged lids that protected contents while enabling quick access. The storage area maintained consistent airflow without creating drafts that might scatter lighter materials. Meanwhile, traditional methods collapsed under the sustained assault of extreme cold. The camp boss on Willow Fork found that his morning routine now consumed between 60 and 90 minutes, depending on wind conditions and the quality of available kindling. His crew lost productive daylight hours that could never be recovered, and their trap lines suffered as energy went to basic survival rather than productive work. The freighter along the Bozeman Road faced even grimmer mathematics. His schedule required departure before dawn to maximize travel time, but fire starting now consumed so much of the early morning that he was reaching destinations well behind schedule. Worse, the time lost to fire management meant less time for proper rest and equipment maintenance, creating a cascade of problems that threatened the viability of his entire operation. At the Army posts, medical officers documented the human cost of inadequate fire management. Frostbite cases increased dramatically as men spent extended periods with ungloved hands, fighting with frozen kindling and stubborn tinder. Minor injuries became serious problems when basic tasks like warming hands and preparing hot food became time-consuming ordeals that tested the limits of human endurance. The cone cache trapper's young partner kept detailed records of their operational efficiency throughout the siege of cold. His notebook documented start times, fuel consumption, and match usage with the precision of a quartermaster managing critical supplies. The numbers told a story of systematic advantage, fires that lit in under 2 minutes versus conventional starts that might take 30 minutes or more, match usage that rarely exceeded 1 per fire versus the multiple attempts required by traditional methods. By late January, the mathematical advantages had accumulated into overwhelming operational superiority. The cone cache system saved between 7 and 14 hours per week, time that could be invested in productive activities rather than the grinding struggle for basic survival that characterized most high country camps during the worst cold snap in recorded memory. The breaking point came on the morning of January 29th. The camp boss on Willow Fork stood over his woodpile with split knuckles and a match tin that rattled empty. His crew huddled in their bedrolls, watching him hack at frozen pine, with movements that spoke of desperation rather than technique. The hatchet bounced off wood that rang like anvil steel, and the kindling he managed to produce lay scattered across snow that had turned to granular ice in the sub-zero air. 3 matches had guttered out before they could ignite the finest shavings. A fourth produced flame that lasted long enough to char the edges of his carefully prepared tinder before dying in a breath of wind that seemed to come from nowhere. His hands had lost sensation below the wrists, and the simple act of striking another match required coordination that extreme cold had stolen from his fingers. Through the gray dawn light, he could see smoke rising straight up from the cone cache trapper's chimney, a thin, steady column that spoke of fire burning with authority, while his own camp remained locked in the grip of cold that penetrated clothing, bedding, and resolve with equal efficiency. The mathematics of survival had shifted beyond argument, and pride no longer offered sufficient warmth to sustain life in conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. The walk to his neighbor's camp took longer than expected. Snow that had seemed firm enough to support a man's weight gave way unexpectedly, plunging him knee-deep into powder that had accumulated in wind-sculpted drifts throughout the basin. By the time he reached the other camp, his breathing came in short gasps that crystallized instantly in the still air, and ice had formed on his beard where exhaled moisture froze before it could dissipate. The demonstration that followed would reshape winter fire management throughout the high country. The cone cache trapper emerged from his cabin without fanfare, selected 4 cones from his ready basket, and arranged them on the fire he had prepared the previous evening. He withdrew a silver pocket watch, a memento from his earlier life in the settlements, and noted the position of the hands before striking a single match against the rough surface of a split log. 15 seconds after the match touched the first cone, flame began spreading through its resinous scales. 30 seconds brought sustained combustion that generated both heat and light sufficient to work by. At 60 seconds, the thumb-thick foundation sticks began to smoke and char at their points of contact with the burning cones. At 1 minute and 47 seconds, he added wrist-thick fuel to a fire that burned with the steady confidence of properly managed combustion. The camp boss stood transfixed by the efficiency of the process. No frantic blowing to encourage reluctant flame. No repeated attempts with precious matches. No extended period of uncertainty while tinder struggled to ignite kindling that might or might not catch fire. The cone method proceeded with the mechanical reliability of a well-designed machine, eliminating every variable that had turned his morning routine into a daily ordeal. Without words, the cone cache trapper filled 2 flour sacks with approximately 60 cones each, enough material to sustain 2 fires daily for roughly 2 weeks if rationed carefully. The sacks went into the camp boss's hands, along with brief instructions delivered in the practical language of men who had learned to waste no energy on unnecessary conversation. Select dry cones that rattle when shaken. Position them with open scales facing the air current. Light from the base where resin concentration was highest. Add fuel when flame reached peak intensity, usually between 90 seconds and 2 minutes after ignition. The transformation that followed rippled through winter camps across the territory. Within 3 days, men who had spent the better part of 2 months mocking the squirrel picker were appearing at his camp with requests for technical guidance. They came quietly, without acknowledgement of their previous skepticism, driven by the undeniable mathematics of survival in conditions that left no room for stubbornness or false pride. The young partner's notebook documented the subtle shift in social dynamics that accompanied technical adoption. Men who had previously demonstrated their fire-starting prowess with elaborate displays of splitting and kindling preparation now sought instruction in cone selection, storage methodology, and optimal fire lay construction. The very techniques they had dismissed as evidence of incompetence became subjects of serious study as extreme weather eliminated the luxury of maintaining inefficient methods. The post-surgeon's temperature logs provided clinical context for the behavioral changes occurring throughout the high country. January readings that consistently dropped below 25 degrees below zero represented more than discomfort. They constituted a direct threat to life that demanded immediate adaptation of survival strategies. Frostbite cases documented in his medical reports corresponded directly to time spent with ungloved hands, making fire management efficiency a matter of medical necessity rather than mere convenience. The freighter along the Bozeman Road became an early and enthusiastic adopter after witnessing a timed demonstration at a supply post near the Yellowstone crossing. His operational requirements demanded fires that lit quickly and burned reliably, regardless of weather conditions or the quality of available fuel. The cone method delivered both characteristics while reducing his morning routine from an hour-long ordeal to a process that consumed less than 5 minutes from ignition to sustainable heat. His adoption carried implications beyond personal survival. The freight network that connected isolated settlements to supply centers depended on maintaining schedules that allowed for predictable delivery times. When weather conditions extended routine tasks beyond reasonable limits, the entire system began to break down. Fire management that worked consistently in extreme conditions became a critical component of keeping commerce flowing through territory, where winter imposed severe constraints on transportation and communication. The blacksmith carpenter at the trading post recognized the broader implications of the emerging technical shift. His forge and workshop served as informal gathering places where news and techniques spread through the scattered community of trappers, freighters, and seasonal workers who moved through the territory. Men who arrived seeking conventional services increasingly requested cone storage bins, drying racks, and other infrastructure that supported the new fire management system. Within 2 weeks of the initial demonstration, he had constructed a dozen cone storage systems based on the original design. Slatted floors that promoted air circulation, deep eaves that protected contents from weather, and internal dividers that allowed for quality sorting became standard features that he incorporated into structures ranging from simple lean-tos to elaborate multi-bay systems designed for large camps or commercial operations. The quiet revolution in winter fire management proceeded without fanfare or formal recognition. Men simply stopped laughing at cone caches and started building their own, driven by practical considerations that eliminated room for aesthetic judgments or traditional preferences. The severe winter of 1867 to 1868 had created conditions that demanded immediate adaptation, and the cone method provided a solution that worked when conventional approaches failed. Spring came late to the Absarokas in 1868, but when the snow finally began its retreat in early April, it revealed a transformed landscape of winter survival knowledge. The cone cache trapper's innovation had spread through the high country with the quiet efficiency of proven technique, adopted not through evangelism, but through the undeniable mathematics of results. Men who had survived the brutal winter carried new knowledge in their hands and new infrastructure around their camps. The post-surgeon's final medical reports for the winter documented a striking pattern. Camps that had adopted cone-based fire management showed significantly fewer cases of frostbite and cold-related injuries during the months of February and March. The correlation was too consistent to ignore. Reduced exposure time during morning fire routines translated directly into fewer medical emergencies and better overall survival rates during the most severe weather on record. By summer, the technique had reached the pages of practical literature circulating among frontier communities. A supply catalog from a Denver outfitter included cone storage baskets among its seasonal offerings, with detailed specifications that reflected the accumulated refinements developed during the previous winter. The baskets featured reinforced bottoms, ventilation slots positioned according to observed airflow patterns, and capacity measurements calibrated to support typical consumption rates through extended cold periods. The young partner's notebook became an informal manual that circulated through trading posts and supply centers across the territory. His precise measurements and consumption calculations provided the mathematical foundation that allowed others to scale the system to their specific needs. A single trapper required approximately 1,000 cones for a full winter season, while larger operations could calculate their requirements by multiplying base consumption rates according to the number of fires maintained daily. The freight network that connected isolated settlements began incorporating cone caches as standard infrastructure. Supply stations along major routes constructed permanent storage facilities designed to support travelers who might arrive during severe weather with inadequate preparation for extended delays. The investment in cone storage infrastructure paid immediate dividends by reducing the time freight operations spent on basic survival tasks during weather delays. The Norwegian Sawyer's influence extended beyond individual camps to entire communities of immigrant settlers who brought their own traditions of systematic preparation to the challenges of Rocky Mountain winters. Swedish and Finnish communities in Montana Territory adopted cone caching as naturally as they had embraced other techniques for managing extreme cold, integrating the method into broader systems of seasonal preparation that included ice storage, food preservation, and fuel management. Scientific validation for the method emerged gradually through observation and documentation. Travelers with engineering backgrounds noted that lodgepole pine cones functioned as nearly perfect fire starters due to their combination of volatile resin content, optimal air-to-fuel ratios created by their scale structure, and concentrated energy density that produced intense heat during critical ignition phases. The chemistry involved compounds that ignited at relatively low temperatures, while releasing sufficient energy to overcome the thermal barriers that defeated conventional kindling in extreme cold. The Trading Post blacksmith documented the economic implications of widespread adoption through his records of infrastructure construction and maintenance. During the summer of 1868, he built 43 cone storage systems for customers ranging from individual trappers to large commercial operations. The standardization of design specifications meant that replacement parts and modifications could be manufactured efficiently, creating a sustainable support system for the emerging technology. Commercial recognition of the technique appeared in the catalog of a Chicago sporting goods company that specialized in frontier equipment. Their 1869 spring catalog featured a section on scientific fire starting that included cone collection baskets, drying screens, and storage containers designed specifically for resinous conifer materials. The catalog copy emphasized the time savings and reliability advantages that had been proven during actual winter conditions in the Rocky Mountain Territory. The method's integration into broader survival knowledge occurred through the informal networks that connected seasonal workers, traveling merchants, and professional guides who moved between frontier communities. Each group adapted the core technique to their specific operational requirements, while maintaining the fundamental principles that ensured reliable results. Hunting guides incorporated lightweight cone collection into their standard camp setup procedures, while mining operations used scaled-up versions to support their winter operations in high-altitude locations. Military applications emerged as army posts throughout the territory began experimenting with cone caches for patrol operations and remote outpost supply. The quartermaster reports from Fort Bridger documented successful trials using portable cone storage systems that allowed cavalry patrols to maintain reliable fire starting capability during extended winter operations. The technique proved particularly valuable for units operating at high altitude, where conventional kindling materials were scarce or unreliable. The broader implications of the innovation extended beyond simple fire management to questions of how traditional knowledge spread through frontier communities. The cone cache method succeeded because it solved a genuine problem using readily available materials and techniques that could be learned quickly by anyone willing to invest autumn preparation time. Its adoption followed natural patterns of information flow through social networks based on practical results rather than formal instruction. Educational institutions and territorial settlements began incorporating cone caching into their practical curriculum for students planning to work in frontier occupations. The Montana Territorial School System included fire management techniques in its manual training programs, recognizing that graduates would need reliable survival skills for careers in mining, logging, freight operations, and agricultural development in regions where winter conditions demanded systematic preparation. The long-term legacy of the technique appeared in published guides and instruction manuals that codified the accumulated knowledge developed through actual winter testing. Horace Kephardt's influential camping manual, published decades later, included detailed instructions for collecting and storing resinous conifer materials as fire starters, directly reflecting principles that had been proven in the high country camps of the 1860s. The cone cache trapper's innovation had evolved from individual survival technique into accepted frontier knowledge, transmitted through the informal networks that connected scattered communities across the Western territories. Men who had once mocked the careful gathering of pine cones now counted cone storage among the essential preparations that separated experienced frontier residents from dangerous amateurs who underestimated the demands of Rocky Mountain winters. The technique endured because it worked, providing reliable results when conventional methods failed and conventional wisdom proved inadequate to the harsh realities of high-altitude survival.